Hi folks, it's Dr. Elam. We're in week 6 of Middle English Literature, and I'm going to give you some brief thoughts about the Lewis reading this time, and then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, especially some of the wordplay elements in the poem. Before I do so, I'll say that this is the last week where I'll be very restrictive in your translation. So I've been impressed with your ability to do the literal word for word types of translations. Very little taking of liberties. It's been quite good. This will be the last week where I have those restrictions on. So as you translate any two stanzas of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, continue on with that literal, almost word for word type of translation, using, of course, the glosses from the Dun and Burns edition to help you out, or the Middle English Dictionary to help you out. The Lewis readings, I want to touch on a couple of points. The first one being the point concerning the discussion of the Mappamundi in particular, and the medieval bestiary in particular. The point entailed in those two examples is that medieval people probably did not read something like a bestiary which contained these allegorical views of the fox and the boar and so on and so forth as zoological manuals. They didn't look at a map like the Mappamundi and think, no sailor would look at the Mappamundi, or no person who had ever been on a sea voyage or traveled on pilgrimage to Jerusalem would look at Mappamundi and think, oh yes, here's a map of the world. They would look at it as a spiritual topography, where Jerusalem is the prime place of reference. It's a Christian topography more so than a spherical globe topography. And just similarly, the bestiaries from the Middle Ages are more spiritual discussions of animals, of the natural world, than they are zoological discussions. Now, there is an exception, a potential exception, when you get to works that discuss wonderful creatures like the phoenix, or creatures like I forgot what they were called in the Old English wonders of the East. But it might be that in some of those bestiary type discussions, sensationalism was the order of the day. It might be seen as similar to our interest in some sort of fantastical creature, still a real creature, but some sort of fantastical, unusual creature in the natural world, and we're in awe of it, and we like all of the sensational details about it. My son, for example, is very enamored with sharks, and so even though it upsets him that people overemphasize the attack aspect of sharks, nevertheless, that is a draw toward thinking about sharks, is that they occasionally have attacked human beings, and that sometimes gets blown out of proportion. And I'm not trying to suggest that the phoenix is a real creature, but the sensational aspects of the phoenix might be just as important as the spiritual aspect of a phoenix, right? The resurrection aspect of the phoenix, which Old English literature makes use of, the resurrection of Jesus being somehow embodied or foreshadowed or allegorized in the creature that is the phoenix. And then to Lewis's point about the human soul, which is also part of our readings, I think it's important to keep in mind that human beings are differentiated from the animals because we have reason. We are able to build knowledge in order to arrive at certain conclusions. which is different from conditioning. So animals can be conditioned. There's the famous experiment of Pavlov's dogs, where he rings a bell and they start salivating before they get their food. It's more complicated than that, but that's the idea. So animals can be conditioned, but are they reasoning through the ringing of the bell in some sort of causal, necessarily causal way, right? I think they're conditioned. Human beings can reason toward building intellectual knowledge. Okay, and remember that you can pose a question to me in your dialogue assignments. So now I want to hit a point about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is an Arthurian romance where Arthur, like a number of Arthurian romances, Arthur is a somewhat marginal figure. He's not the main character of the story, but one of his knights is. And many people are surprised to see that Arthur is not the exemplary king that he's often presented to be. It's not unusual during the Middle Ages to find an Arthur who is presumptuous, or in the case of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, somewhat petulant in his refusal to eat until he's seen a wonder, which of course brings about the problem of the Green Knight showing up. Or at least it coincides with that. Gawain, even though he's described as this very virtuous knight, we still find out may not be as virtuous as he thinks he is. We shouldn't read him as a wicked character who is totally mistaken about his virtue. Instead, we should see him as a well-meaning character who may have a higher estimation of himself than is warranted. And the temptations that he experiences at Bertilac's castle in the third part of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight really reveal his flaws, which are discussed in more detail in the fourth and final part of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. What I would like to focus on are a couple of points of language to show the wordplay the Gawain poet uses. And I do believe that the Gawain poet is the same poet who wrote Pearl, which we read last week. But I want to look at some of this wordplay to show that a lot of the effect, the narrative effect of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is embedded in the Middle English language itself. Despite the fact that authors like J.R.R. Tolkien and Simon Armitage and others have translated Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and done good jobs translating it, sometimes the fine meaning, the fine shades of meaning are lost in translation. Not the overall meaning, right? We can get that. We understand in a general sense, or even in a somewhat particular sense, the action of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But some of the wordplay, the fine-tuning is remarkable. And so I'll ask you to look at part 2. This would be stanza 32. And I'm going to start at line 753. So he is... Gawain is wandering in the wilderness with his horse Gringelot, and he's cold and in desperate need of shelter, and so he says a prayer. It says this, starting in line 753. And therefore, seeking he said, right, he said it while he was sighing, I beseech thee, Lorde, and Mary, that is mildest moder so dear, of some herber there haly I meet here mass, and thy maintenance to mourn meekly I ask, and thereto pressly I pray my pater and Ave and Crede. So he's looking for some sort of refuge, right? I need a place to stay. So he's praying. And then what's called the bob and wheel, that's that little 2-syllable line followed by the 4 cross-rhyme lines, says this, I pray my pater and ave and crede. He rode in his prayer and cried for his misdeed. So he rides on while he's praying and he cries for his sins. He's lamenting his sins. And it does show that Gawain is pious. And sainted him in sith as Sarah, and crossed him many times and said, "Cross Christ me spade." So he's doing the cross and trying to, well, not trying to. He is crying out for mercy, crying out for a boon in his prayer. So we'll see the wordplay now developed in the next stanza. Not he sended himself sage but three, ere he was ware in the wood of a one in a moat, right? So he becomes aware of this place as he's riding along. Above a land, on a lawa, the law is a word for like a hill, on a lawa, looking under bowers of many borlick bole about by the ditches, so there's trees and so on and so forth around. A castle, the comlocus that ever kenicht octa, pitched on a prairie, a park all about, with a picked palace pinned full thick, that umberte moni tre mon then to mila. And so so it's a castle that has a wide wall of great circumference around it. And I want to focus on the castle that's on the law, the hill, and it's pitched on a prairie, so like a flat land on top of that hill. So it's pitched on a prairie, it says in line 768, I believe. And we notice that almost 10 lines before he rides on in his prayer. So this is part of the wordplay that the Gawain poet is using. So Gawain is riding along in prayer and he sees a castle pitched on a prayer. And for the reader, they would be homophones, right? They would sound the same. And so the punning effect is that it's pitched on a prairie, right? A flat land on top of that law or hill. But it's also pitched on the prayer of Gawain himself. And so we see that Gawain's prayer has been answered in a way by the appearance of this castle. And so it is supernatural, and we will find out later on in the narrative just how planned these supernatural encounters are. But the poet is constantly using these moments where words build anticipation toward other uses of words. The prayer is the most important thing in this castle. So Gawain, who serves the Virgin Mary, whatever we may think of it, Gawain, who serves the Virgin Mary and sees her as a mediator between him and Christ, prays not only to her but also to Christ, and this castle appears, and it will test him spiritually, this castle. And then the final point of wordplay I want to point out is from this around this same passage here. Now it happens all throughout the poem, but I'm just focusing here because it happens in two places very close together. If we go to the next stanza, after the 33rd stanza where the castle is pitched on the prayer, we go to stanza 34 as he is arriving to the actual castle gates, approaching the castle gates and kind of taking it all in. It says, "The burn bode on Bonk, that on Blanc hovet, of the deep double ditch that drove to the place, the wall of wood in the water wonderly dape, and after few holge height hit halled upon lofta of hard hewn stone up to the tables, embaned under the battlement in the best lawa." So the castle he's got a deep moat, it's built with cut stone, and it's built on the best lawa. Now in this case, it doesn't mean hill, even though we've already heard that it is on a hill, but it's built according to the best plan, according to the best schematic. So law is being used in that sense. And so what we see is we have the castle that's pitched on a prairie, really pitched on a prayer, and a castle that is set on a law, on a hill, but also set on a schematic, on a way of doing things. And what we will find out is that the law or schematic or framework, not just of the castle, but the framework of the agreement between Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which opened up our poem, that he needs to come a year and a day later to get the return blow from the Green Knight. This castle is built on law. And we will see that Gawain, though he tries to keep the letter of the law of his agreement, in the castle pitched on the prayer, built on the law, Gawain will discover who he really is. It will be revealed to him after he rides forth and meets the Green Knight in the final part of the poem, but the wordplay is magnificent. And the poet is showing us early on that Gawain is a flawed individual. He's not evil, right? He's not an anti-hero or anything like that. He's still, I think we are still to admire him, but we are also to be mindful that even the most noble of Arthur's knights has a broken part of him. And at the end of the poem, and this is, hopefully I'm not spoiling anything, at least spoiling the main action. At the end of the poem, Arthur and his court don't really understand what Gawain has experienced. Gawain will figure out that he is the flawed knight he didn't think he was before, but the court won't. The court won't figure it out. In fact, the court will go on putting on airs. The court will go on with its presumptuousness, with its reliance on courtesy, like courtly, customary behavior. It will continue on with that. Only Gawain has really changed. Arthur is not changed. Guinevere is not changed. The rest of the court is not changed. Gawain is, his knowledge is hard won, and I think the readers are supposed to take away from that the idea that, perhaps things are not always what they seem, right? That's kind of an empty sentiment, but in terms of the Arthurian court, this noble, seemingly noble collection of people may not be as noble as we think. There is nobility to be found, but it needs to be teased out in a testing episode, and Gawain undergoes it, right? It's a very difficult episode for him. All right, so that is my kind of overview on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Of course, one of the aspects of the dialogue is to pose a question about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Perhaps you'll have a question about wordplay. It doesn't have to be about wordplay. It can be about some other aspect of the poem also. All right, so I had to pause to look at the questions for week 5. So let me address Charles's questions about Piers Plowman concerning the tearing up of the pardon in Passus 7. I think it's 7. Yeah, is what's going on there? So Langland is one of his objections to church, the way the church does things, is that it offers pardons that a person can buy for money without necessarily doing anything to show that you are sorry for the sins you're being forgiven. So Langland isn't doing. He really is proto-reformational, but his concern is not the same explicit concerns that we associate with the Reformation. His concern is that people believe they can practice a kind of lazy Christianity, where if you have enough money to buy a bull of pardon, then you don't need to think about doing the right thing. For him, it's almost like the book of James is being, thought through in Piers Plowman. It's more than that, but the idea that if you say that you want forgiveness of sins, and you in your heart you really are repentant of your sins, then you'll actually do something about it. Now, I know that James is talking about faith and belief and works and not necessarily about confession of sin, but in Langland's mind it's all connected. So he is not saying that you can earn your way into heaven or anything like that. Although there is a strong aroma of looks like works-based salvation. But I'm going to give Langland the benefit of the doubt and say that he has a very Epistle of James outlook on the Christian faith, namely that if you have Christian faith, then the deeds of your life, the works of your life, will show it. I mean, the way I'm in the Reformed tradition, and the Westminster Catechism affirms that. Of course, they also affirm that salvation that's another issue, and only God can bring about salvation. They would just say that the works of salvation are evidence of saving faith. Well, I'm kind of playing a little loose with the words there, but Langland, his objection is this lazy confessional view of Christianity. We're not reading all of Piers Plowman, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately. It's somewhat long, but there is more complexity in Langland's views than maybe our selections give credit for. So, I do think he's proto-reformational. I don't know. It might be, as you point out, it might be a little anachronistic to think of him in reformational terms. May not be fair to him. But I would say my speculation, if you'll allow me a moment of speculation, my thought is that he would welcome the kind of pushback brought by the Reformation, the emphasis or the de-emphasis on church authority, and the abusive application of church authority, the manipulative aspect of church authority, which would enable professing Christians to say that they are Christians, to say they have faith when in fact their lives are not conforming to that at all. But he, maybe he wouldn't be on board with all of the points that Luther makes in his theses, or all of the all of Calvin's points in his Institutes. As for your question concerning Lewis and the discussion of the Long Ivy is the most puzzling chapter to me in The Discarded Image. Not because the concepts are puzzling. The concepts are, I think fairly clear. There's a category of being that doesn't fit neatly into the celestial hierarchies, angels, the orders of angels and so forth. And it doesn't fit neatly into the natural world, either in the animal realm or the human realm. There seems to be this category of being that's an outlier. So, I think that's a pretty clear idea. Also, the ambiguity of that category, I think Lewis is good at presenting. It's not clear whether these beings are of their own kind, if we should think of them as fallen angels. Some people in the Middle Ages did think of them as fallen angels. If they are a category of the dead, people like ghosts, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of speculation about these creatures, right? There's no real codified way or at least widespread codified way of looking at them. What puzzles me about Lewis's discussion is why it's so important to discuss it. And I think it probably goes to Lewis's own thesis about the Middle Ages being extremely put together, extremely categorical. Right? They're very organized. Right? The Middle Ages, as I mentioned early in a lecture, they really enjoy putting things in boxes. Right? They don't want to think outside of the box. They want to think inside of the box. That's why there are boxes. You know, I know it's more complicated than that, but I think that because that's part of Lewis's thesis, he wants to account for this outlier category. And I'll also say it may be discussions with his friend and colleague, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, who, he and Tolkien probably had these kinds of discussions. He even, in one of our readings coming up, he'll even drop the word Hobbit into his discussion, talking about the effect of the medieval model on its readers. So, maybe this is just a byproduct of Lewis's thesis, discussions that he's had with a scholar friend of his, and it's interesting to me. The chapter is interesting to me. I'm just not sure how useful it is. And let me just look at how you worded your question, Charles. You say, is the argument for their distinction a sufficient one? Do the sources provided give enough justification for their own category? Lewis admits that they don't fit neatly into the model. Does Lewis intend to confront the baggage associated with the word fairy? I think that, again, it's a function of Lewis's thesis. As for the word fairy, I'm pretty certain that is a byproduct of discussions that he is having with J.R.R. Tolkien. They are thinking through the word fairy in a particular way. I think that Lewis is trying, just remind me of the details of your question here. Is he confronting the baggage associated with the word fairy? Or is he talking about why fairy is not an appropriate title? I'm not sure he's doing either. I think if you want a discussion about the term fairy, Tolkien's essay on fairy stories would be the place to go, and I think it would also express a lot of Lewis's own ideas. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm staring at my bookshelf to see if I can see a collection of Lewis's works on there. I don't remember, but I think Lewis also has a work called On Stories, and he may discuss the idea of fairies in there. He definitely discusses the idea of fairies in his well-known fiction collections, right? The Chronicles of Narnia, and then the Space Trilogy. So he talks about fairies in both of those places. In fact, I think it's oddly enough, it's a more developed discussion in the Space Trilogy than it is in Chronicles of Narnia. So, it's an odd chapter. I think it's valuable for pointing out that there is this other category of being that, seems like an outlier, and medieval writers and later in the Renaissance, writers handle them and think about them in various ways that don't always agree with each other. All right, so that's it for our overview and discussion in week 5. I will come back again next week with discussions about Chaucer, and also addressing your questions posed to me in the dialogue assignments. I hope everybody's having a good week. I hope everybody had a blessed Holy Week, culminating with Easter, that you meditated on not only the death and suffering of our Lord, but also his resurrection and the implications for God's love for us and his desire to save those of us who believe in him, the election of individuals to salvation, that God cares enough to do that for us, to die for our sins. I think is a powerful subject of meditation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will talk to you all next week. Take care. Bye.